Today's review is sponsored by the new romantic comedy, Somebody Up There Loves Me, the story of a proctologist in love.
Watch it, Alan, I'm shooting.
Jungle Holocaust. Ruggero Deodato is one of the most notorious Italian horror directors, mostly because he's the guy who directed Cannibal Holocaust, which many people consider to be one of the most controversial horror movies ever made. However, that wasn't his first addition to the Italian cannibal genre. Jungle Holocaust, aka Last Cannibal World, was the first movie in what eventually became known as Deodato's Cannibal Trilogy. It consisted of this movie, Cannibal Holocaust, and Cut and Run.
Because here, terror was born.
In Jungle Holocaust, our main character is Robert. He and his buddy Rolf are two oil prospectors who are en route to Malaysia to locate the rest of their crew deep within the jungle. After their plane lands in a field, they soon discover that their crew has been killed by cannibals. Soon, the two friends are separated in the jungle, and Robert ends up being captured by this primitive, cave-dwelling tribe who proceed to strip, humiliate, and imprison him. As Robert is continually humiliated by his captors, he's also in desperate need for food and water. He eventually has no choice but to take one of the tribal women hostage and try to escape this jungle nightmare. Jungle Holocaust, like most Italian cannibal movies, starts out as a jungle adventure movie. There are some horrific scenes, like a scene of torture here and there, but it doesn't go as extreme as Cannibal Holocaust. It still has plenty of disturbing moments, but not as much as Cannibal Holocaust. This one focuses a little more on the jungle adventure. Of course, this being an Italian cannibal movie, it does have the problem of animal cruelty. There are a fair amount of animals that are killed on camera, and for those of you who watch my videos, you know my position on this. I'm not a vegetarian. I enjoy a dead animal on my plate, but I don't think it's right for an animal to be killed for the sake of entertainment. But even though I don't think it's right, I also understand that these movies came out a long time ago, and there's nothing I can do to change what happened. All we can do is learn from the past, so we don't repeat the same mistakes in the future. Jungle Holocaust is a good jungle adventure horror movie. Robert is the everyman put in this desperate situation. He's our eyes. While we watch him try to survive in the jungle and get imprisoned by this tribe, we wonder what would we do if we were put in the same predicament. That's the main appeal of these survival horror movies. It leaves you to wonder, what would you do in this situation? There's not a lot of dialogue in Jungle Holocaust, and that's one of the things I respect about it the most. Before Robert is captured, he and his buddy Rolf talk a lot. But once Robert's captured, there are long stretches where there's little to no dialogue. This tribe doesn't speak much, and Robert doesn't have much to say to them. But the movie isn't boring. It's visual storytelling. Now, I love me some good dialogue. I love smart dialogue. I love fun dialogue. If I'm watching a movie and it's filled with some well-done monologues, I'm a happy guy. But film is a visual medium, and when a movie is able to tell its story without a lot of dialogue, I respect that. Jungle Holocaust manages to stay interesting without people talking. The dialogue does come back. Robert eventually escapes from the tribe with one of the native girls and meets back up with his friend Rolf. It becomes a jungle adventure again in this act, and it's still interesting. It's also a very dirty movie. I like how the fact that Robert gets covered with filth and they never clean him off. He's lost in the jungle, so naturally he's going to get dirty. This is gonna sound weird, but another thing I respect about this movie is the nudity. Now, before I get into that aspect, I do have to mention that the people they got to play the tribe in this movie were an actual primitive tribe. So a lot of the nudity was based around that. You have women walking around with their tits hanging out, kids are running around wearing no clothes whatsoever. You have to understand that this is a primitive tribe, and clothes aren't that important to them. But then we have our main character Robert, played by Massimo Foschi. I already know I butchered that name, so I apologize. He is naked for the majority of this movie, and we see everything. I'm a simple guy. I enjoy the naked female body as much as the next horn dog. But I think it's brave for anybody to go fully nude in a movie, regardless of their sex and or gender. He does eventually cover himself with a loincloth, but I'd say for a good 60% of this movie at least, Robert's just flopping around all over the place right out in the open. When his clothes are first ripped off, it's an interesting scene. The tribe has no concept of underwear, or clothes in general for that matter, so it's odd to them. Then they start playing around with him. Now, in most horror movies, we see women stripped down and whatever the antagonist is playing around with her. So I appreciate that this movie showed the other side of that. I appreciate they showed a man going through the same situation. I like when movies do something different. Of course, we also have the native girl, played by Mei Mei Lei, who is also running around naked for the majority of this movie. So you have this naked man and this naked woman running around the jungle together, and I think that's fine. I think people have become too afraid of nudity nowadays.
Completely naked? With no clothes on.
I'm not gonna say Jungle Holocaust is this deeply profound movie. It's a shocking flick. Not as shocking as Cannibal Holocaust. I'd call Jungle Holocaust Cannibal Holocaust light. But Jungle Holocaust is still filled with some fucked up moments. You have scenes of sexual assault, cannibalism, of course, the animal cruelty, and one particular scene that's upsetting. A native woman gives birth to a baby and then feeds it to a crocodile. It's not as graphic as other stuff in the movie. It's more suggested, but it's pretty clear what happens. If you're just getting into Italian horror and you're curious about checking out some Italian cannibal flicks, I personally think that Cannibal Apocalypse is a better movie for beginners in that genre, but if you want to watch a more traditional cannibal movie, then Jungle Holocaust is a good beginner flick for people looking at cannibal flicks. All in in all, Jungle Holocaust is a solid Italian cannibal flick. For people who like Italian cannibal flicks. I understand that these movies aren't for everybody, so keep that in mind if you're curious. Admittedly, Jungle Holocaust isn't my favorite cannibal movie. I wouldn't even put it in my top 30 favorite Italian horror movies, but it is a good movie. It's a jungle adventure flick with a horror edge, and I would recommend it to fans of Italian horror and cannibal flicks. And with that, let's get to the Grindhouse Rankings. We've got a body count of 9. The kills consist of, but are not limited to, spear stabbings, death by jungle trap, blows to the head, and being eaten by cannibals. It reaches the cannibal requirements with flesh eating, jungle adventures, and graphic scenes of violence. There is a lot of nudity in this flick. We have a real primitive tribe, so a lot of people are just walking around naked, but we also have the male and female lead walking around fully nude for a good portion of the movie. There are long stretches where there's little to no dialogue, and I respect that. Visual storytelling, a novel idea for movies. There are some disturbing moments, not as much as other cannibal flicks, but still a good amount, so be ready for that. This does lead more into the jungle adventure side of things, but most cannibal movies involve jungle adventure. And it's a solid jungle adventure. I'm giving this a 3.6 out of 5. Overall, it's a solid movie in the cannibal genre. Not the best, but a good movie for fans of Italian cannibal movies. As always, I want to thank everyone for watching and supporting my channel. Please leave a comment down below. Here's an interesting question. If you were lost in the jungle, do you think you would survive? Me? I'd be surprised if I lasted more than a day. But I think that would be an interesting question, so leave that down below. This is the Maniac, here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die. This is technically vegetarian, because the person was in a coma before I cooked them. That's a terrible joke, I apologize for that.